of our three types of bonds, covalent bonds, ionic bonds, and hydrogen bonds. Hydrogen bonds are the only bonds where we don't have the sharing or the loss of an electron to another atom. Hydrogen bonds are a little bit different in that they are created by the interaction between polar charged regions of two or more separate molecules. So we talked about electronegativity and polar bonds, where we might have one atom that is very electronegative bound to another atom that is less electronegative. And in a polar bond, electrons are going to be more strongly attracted towards one of our atoms, usually oxygen, although for our classes it could also be nitrogen. So in a polar bond, electrons are going to spend more time around that oxygen than they are the hydrogen. And that's because the electrons in oxygen, or in the bond between oxygen and another atom, are being pulled towards that oxygen atom because it is strongly electronegative. And so what that does is create a region that is very strongly negatively charged and a region that is positively charged. Now, when two of these atoms are near to one another, the negatively charged region of one is going to be attracted to the positively charged region of another. So commonly, we see this in water molecules, and water molecules are going to be the most common hydrogen bonds that we are going to see. And that's because we get a strongly negative region around the oxygen and a positive region around those hydrogens. So a hydrogen bond is an attraction rather than the sharing of electrons. Now, what this means for interaction between molecules is that a single attraction is not nearly as strong as the actual sharing or the loss of an electron. However, when you have a whole bunch of hydrogen bonds all together, basically making a network of hydrogen bonds, they become really, really strong. So for example, if we have a droplet of water, this droplet of water is going to stay together. That's why you see it sort of roll down a window or a piece of glass. That's why you see it hang at the edge of a faucet, because this water droplet is made up of thousands and thousands of water molecules that are all attracted to one another, and they're holding really, really tightly to one another. Hydrogen bonding is really important in our biological molecules as well. First of all, water is super important. Water is the main component of all of our cells in our body. And so some of our properties of water come from this polar interaction. But hydrogen bonds are also important in our big biological molecules, such as DNA. In fact, DNA is a double-stranded molecule, meaning that it is two chains that are essentially attracted to one another, and they are held together by hydrogen bonds. So our molecule that contains all of the information for life is still held together by these hydrogen bonds in the center. So hydrogen bonds are really important for our cells and for our functions in our cells. So water is made up of polar covalent bonds. And remember, a polar covalent bond is a bond that forms when two atoms share electrons. In a non-polar covalent bond, those electrons are shared equally. In a polar covalent bond, they are shared unequally. So within a single water molecule, we have an oxygen atom bound to two hydrogen atoms. And I have drawn these little circles around our atomic symbols because I want to represent where the electrons are going to be. So this is a covalent bond, so electrons are actually being shared between our hydrogen and our oxygen. But remember that the oxygen is really electronegative and it's pulling the electrons towards itself. still sharing with hydrogen, but those electrons are going to spend more time around that oxygen molecule. So we're going to get that negative charge there, positive charge there. Remember this little symbol we're going to use to mean partial. So we've got a partial negative and a partial positive. So if we have another water molecule in here, this negative of the oxygen side is going to be attracted to the positive of the hydrogen side. And if we draw in a few more, we have the negative attracted to the negative. We might have another one here. And then another one here that is attracted to these hydrogens. And so very quickly, you get this network of positive and negative attraction. Now this is going to produce a net-like structure that is going to end up essentially being a cube or lattice-like structure. So when water is attracted to itself, it produces this really regular pattern of positive to negative attractions. And that is where we are going to get our strong hydrogen bonds in our water molecules. Now, that same idea is going to transfer to our other biological molecules. Anytime we have an oxygen bound to a hydrogen or a carbon, we are going to have a polar bond. So each one of these between oxygen and hydrogen is a polar bond. But the big molecule itself is also going to be polar. So we can talk about polar as a bond and polar for the whole molecule. And when we get that partial charge, that's when we get this attraction between two atoms. So here we've got a nice, neat picture of our partial charges. So around our oxygen here, we've got the negative charge. It is attracted to the positive region of the next water molecule nearby. And again, we get this big collection of water molecules. If we continued to add, we would see that we would continue to add in this really nice almost tetrahedron shape. Not quite a tetrahedron, which is basically a pyramid, but you'll see that these are regular distances apart.